And welcome to the DartPoints Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, William.
Hey, everybody,
Hey,
this is Michael. Hey, Will, how's it going?
going well, going well. It's been a little while since we've done a podcast. A lot has gone on, and some good things. If you're watching the video stream, you probably noticed some of the graphics are different, and our titles are different. So just kind of wanted to briefly mention, Venue has been acquired by a very large data center called DartPoints. And I shouldn't just say data center, it's data center and solution center, right? We provide a lot of the same things that legacy Venue provided, but also now we have data centers all over the East Coast, right? So we have now a plethora of other places that our customers can reside in, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there'll be more to come in subsequent podcasts that actually speak to the DartPoints Venue acquisition. Those will be coming up, but on the flip side, we did want to get some podcasts out, and today's podcast will be fantastic, right? We're going to talk about public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud. We've talked about this before in the past on other podcasts. However, we do have a special guest with us. We have Mr. Blake Proffitt, who is DartPoints product manager. So this is a great person to have on board for us to talk about cloud. Blake, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your role at DartPoints and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Blake Proffitt. I'm the product manager at DartPoints. I've been with the company probably since about 2011, 2012. I myself was part of an acquisition. So a company in Nashville became part of a company called Medion, and then Medion became DartPoints, and that's kind of how we got here today. My role at the company is, product manager is kind of an ambiguous term unless you are a product manager, but it's working with all the teams to help deliver the best possible services for our customers. That's my role here.
And if you're watching the video stream, Blake did not want to turn on his camera, and we said, we're going to have you back, Blake, but the thing that you have to sign off on is you will have to have your camera turned on.
Yeah, and that's fair. I think just for the shock value, I'm not used to podcasts, so I didn't want you guys to see me sweating as we talk through this.
No, it's totally fine.
No,
You're going to be fine. This is going to be a great podcast. So what we're going to talk about, really, this podcast is to support kind of a blog article, Blake, that you wrote earlier last month, right? And really, this is one that's on the DartPoints website. If you log into dartpoints.com, click on resources and click blog, you'll be able to see all of the blog articles that are on the DartPoints website. I think, Blake, you write most of these, don't you?
Only recently, honestly. So they've let me kind of into the fold, and that's, for better, for worse, people can be the judge of that. But certainly we've been getting a lot of questions around the different types of clouds. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that comes from folks that are adopting the cloud or moving to the cloud, which is, even in 2023, there's still companies that are moving to the cloud. The terminology can get a bit ambiguous, and there's a lot of overlap, and there's Michael, in security, I don't think anything tops the acronym soup or the alphabet soup of acronyms. But in cloud, you get the same thing where you get, okay, what is public, what is private, what is hybrid, what is multi, what is community? There's so many different cloud types that we felt we wanted to clarify and kind of help educate and steer in the right directions. Folks that hear these terms, they're moving to the cloud, and they want to know what are we looking at? What is all this? And that was the goal.
Yeah, exactly. And we still get, and as you said, Blake, we still get customers that have either been with us for a long time or new customers that really want to understand, really what is the difference, right? What truly is public cloud? And as it relates to DartPoints, or it relates to the hyperscalers being AWS, Azure, GCP, Google Cloud Platform, really, what is the difference? And really, the bigger question is, what is right for my customer, right? And that's something that DartPoints does a good job at consulting with the customer on really what's the best solution, whether if it's public cloud, private, or hybrid. We really want to look at what's the best solution for the customer and what tailor fits it, what is tailor fitted to their needs.
Right.
So cloud in general, and Michael, you threw up a nice little, I won't put it in the chat, but a nice little icon of, what is cloud computing? Let's talk about cloud computing just to begin with, right? And really cloud computing, cloud is nothing, is you're utilizing someone else's infrastructure, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And typically when you think of cloud, you're thinking multi-tenancy, self-service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. So something that you're not having to go out and spend a whole bunch of money, capital expenditure, buying gear, right? So you can look at the cloud way, which is typically operational expense, right? You're paying a subscription versus going out and procuring gear, finding a place for it, getting it stood up, getting it provisioned, installing your applications, getting your applications working. And oh, by the way, in 3 to 5 years, you're going to have to go do this all over again because you have to refresh hardware, right? Hardware doesn't last forever. And we've done several podcasts in the past, really investigating, really talking about really what's right. Should I pay a monthly subscription? Should I go buy all my stuff, right? And Fazely, don't laugh, but I was talking about, you and I were talking offline not too long ago about, this has nothing to do with IT, but I was like, I might want to get into vinyl records, right? Maybe I want to go buy music and keep it in my house. And, and then I was like, well, wait a minute. I have so much, I pay, $30 a month, whatever, for Apple Music, but I have everything I need. I don't, maybe it's better for me to pay the subscription to have everything that I need versus going out and buying stuff. Now I have to have, an insurance plan for my my vinyl collection or my hardware, right? Same kind of thinking, right?
Well, outside of the capital expenditure that you talked about, there's also an administrative perspective to this, right?
Mm-hmm.
That oftentimes is attractive for organizations, right? If there's something that they don't want to have to manage, or they don't have the technical acumen with their staff to be able to manage something like vCloud Director or something like that, which we'll talk about in a bit. That's another very attractive thing about these different types of clouds that we're going to discuss.
Right. So let's get into it. Public cloud, right? Typically, when we think of public cloud, when a customer, right, someone on out in the world, when they think about public cloud, they think about companies like Amazon AWS, right? And that can be EC2, that can be the various and very numerous services that Amazon Web Services provide, whether that's infrastructure as a service with things like EC2 or storage as a service, looking at things like object storage or S3 storage. So you have the hyperscalers, Azure as well as included in there, Google Cloud Platform, Oracle's own cloud. And then you have companies like DartPoints that are doing the same thing, but instead of being in an Amazon point of presence or an Azure point of presence, maybe we're building the same type of infrastructure at one of our data centers that we own, right? So for instance, we can have the same type of experience or a very similar experience that a customer who would want to consume virtual machines in AWS, we can have that same experience in our own data center that we govern and we manage. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I mentioned earlier with when I brought up VMware vCloud Director, that is what our cloud is built upon. And that allows us to create different tenants and provision resources for those tenants to be able to run their virtual environments. It's very cool. And like you said, even though the first thought for a lot of customers is, AWS, Azure, all these other very, very common names,
mm-hmm.
There are a lot of other data centers that run public clouds, DartPoints being one of them.
Exactly.
So you use the term tenants, Michael, and that's kind of what we're seeing. So again, public cloud used to mean essentially shared resources across customers or across tenants. Now, public cloud is becoming synonymous with hyperscalers like Azure, AWS, and Google. So what you're seeing, we see it internally as well as with competitors, as well as across the market, is adopting the term multi-tenant cloud, which I think is a better way to describe it. But essentially, multi-tenant cloud, public cloud, you could say they're synonymous. Though again, public cloud is starting to mean hyperscalers. You're benefiting from the economies of scale, right? So when you purchase into a public cloud, you are on shared hardware, although it's dedicated. There's security measures to make it specific to your tenant, but you're benefiting from powerful hardware dedicated to your account, and so that's where it becomes each customer is a tenant, multi-tenant cloud. So that term, I think you'll start to see over time. I think those terms will start to vary a bit more, where public cloud again will be, okay, that's hyperscaler when we use that term. But it does just mean multi-tenant. That's essentially what that means.
Exactly. And for instance, like when we're selling our cloud to customers, the thing that we talk about is, hey, look, you're not having to purchase hardware, software licensing, like VMware licensing or things like this to run your own environment. We're taking on that burden, and you're really just reaping the rewards of us hosting this at one of our data centers. So like when when a customer's like, okay, what do I pay for? Really, you just pay for the resources that you're consuming to run your workloads. You're not having to pay for, oh, wait, I need to do maintenance on my hardware, or like, what do you call it? Support and maintenance on physical gear, right? You're not paying for that. You're just paying for the ability kind of to sleep overnight, right? I want to check into the hotel, have a few nights, and then I want to check out. Hopefully you don't check out, right? Because we want to keep our customers happy and at our data centers, but it gives you the ability to really be a tenant, right? And you occupy a room in our hotel. That makes sense? That's kind of analogy there.
I think that's fair. Yeah. And one of the things, so customers tend to, the phrase we hear a lot is, I want out of the hardware game.
Yes.
They call it the hardware game. And the reason for that is, again, like you said, the constant maintenance, the upkeep, the hardware refresh cycles, and then post COVID now, although it's getting a little better, but being able to order hardware and get it on time, right? So
yes,
hardware, it can take years sometimes, months if it's kind of smaller hardware, but that current market for hardware is becoming difficult to predict, and also there's a lot of lead time, which creates headache. They just want out of the hardware game, and we hear that time and time again from businesses of all sizes, really small up all the way up to mid-size, medium enterprise. They just want out of hardware.
Yeah, and honestly, we have a so if you're listening to the podcast, we have an audio podcast that we actually recorded. What, Michael, maybe 8 months ago, we had Andy Piner on, and the podcast title was Lifecycle Management, right? Mm-hmm. And this kind of directly talks into what Blake was just mentioning, is like, how do you actually, it's not just I'm buying hardware and I'm great, I don't have to worry about it for 10 years or anything. It's like, no, I'm buying hardware, and by the time I got it stood up, my applications moved into it and running well, I got to start planning for the next upgrade. I got to start planning for the next whatever you're doing. And then you have to also factor in, what do I have to think about growth, right? And what happens if my application maybe, or my business shrinks in size, right? Now I've got a bunch of hardware that I'm not using, and I can't shrink that. It's not like I can say, oh, let me go take some RAM sticks out of my server and go send it back to the vendor and I get a credit. It doesn't work like that. I'm owning that hardware, and I have to spend a lot of time and resources sizing it properly to where I'm not buying too much or I'm not buying too little. And it can really become a challenge.
Yeah,
right?
There's a lot of planning that goes into that. And to kind of boil that podcast down into one sentence, it's, you don't really get the life that you expect out of the hardware that you buy, right? You say, I'm going to get 5 years out of this, but in reality, you're not fully up and running on it immediately, and you're having to migrate off of it before the end, because it's going to be end of support.
So 36 months, you may only get 30 months or maybe even less than that, right? Depends on if you're doing 3 years, 5 years, or whatever. But anyway,
Yeah,
so pros and cons of public cloud, whether it's AWS, Google, Azure, really the pros are what? Increased scalability, agility. You kind of are paying for what you're using, right? And you can add VMs, add resources, and reduce. Typically with hypervisors or hyperscalers like Amazon, Azure, and GCP, you're also doing it hourly billing. Now, this can be a pro. This can also be a con, right? So when we look at the cons of public cloud, really, what I see customers tell me all the time really is, man, my bill is never the same, right? And these days I think you can pay in chunks, right? But the thing is the old joke is pay as you go broke, right? Is the unpredictability of some hyperscalers can really be a challenge to IT organizations, right? Yeah. And what you also look at is, especially if you're dealing with IT folks, they tend to have there's a phrase called VM sprawl, which means it's so easy to consume these resources. I'm just going to go deploy servers as I need. And then, after 3 or 4 months, you look at your bill and like, wait a minute, I've increased by a third or maybe by half. What am I doing? And you look at your resources, you're like, oh wait, someone's been deploying VMs, right? So it's kind of a pro and a con in the same thing. It's kind of like a buffet, right? I can eat as much as I want, but at some point in time, you got to pay for it.
Yeah, it really depends on the organization. There are organizations that need that flexibility and that scalability, and they understand the billing piece going into it, so they don't really care as much. But then you have other organizations that they want that finite bill month after month after month, and they want it, to be exactly the same each month. And then public cloud gets a little bit dicey for them.
Yep, exactly.
Or can get dicey.
You guys kind of hit it. I think when you're talking public cloud, the scalability, the on-demand style of public cloud is what a lot of customers are looking for when they head that direction. When they start to run away from public cloud, which we've seen people that went into maybe even a hyperscaler and they are now looking to escape. That tends to be because of costs.
Yep.
So that tends to be because unpredictable costs. The other gotcha is a lot of customers get credits for the first little bit that they go into a hyperscaler, a little tricky move that they pull, right? And so you've seen 3 months worth of billing, but you've seen it based on some credits, some bonuses that you get. And then all of a sudden now you're the IT director stuck explaining why your bill just jumped on month 4, right? You didn't expect that. There's some fine print that you didn't read.
Yeah, your first hit is free, and then the rest is where they get you.
That's right. And so they give you like a little bit of a leeway, right? So you think, okay, I've seen it a month or two, so I feel like I can predict the costs. And then right when you get again to that 3 or 4 month mark, that's where you get that surprise. Oh no, I didn't realize I was getting some credits.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, we're not by any means, saying hyperscalers are necessarily evil or anything. They fit a big need, and we are DartPoints here is a public cloud, right? We differ slightly in terms of how we're billing, how we're charging, and we definitely give the customer more of a consultative approach to best practices in terms of scaling their environment and how we are billing the customers a little bit more. And this is my personal feelings. We're a little bit better at giving the customer a predictable billing model, based on our cloud, but there we go. So that's public cloud. Hopefully that's some good talking points. Let's talk about private cloud, right? Typically, when a customer comes to us and they're like, hey, I'm interested in private cloud, or they'll ask us to talk about the differences. And really, when it comes down to it, where public cloud is multi-tenant, public cloud is, I want a room in your hotel. Private cloud means I don't want to share my rooms with anybody, right? I don't want to have adjoining rooms. I don't want to have to
renting out the floor.
No, we're building a whole hotel for you, right? I don't want to worry about noisy neighbors, and that really means, my tenants next to me making a bunch of noise, or my VMs that are in adjacent suffering some kind of issue that would affect me. In our case, it doesn't with the way how we architected our cloud. But if a customer wants to have guaranteed resources and be able to see everything that they're doing, and have the visibility of being able to know I'm on my own physical hardware. And maybe they want to be able to see the underlying physical hardware. When I say see, I mean, log into a portal and actually see the hardware resources. That's tend to what we're thinking about private cloud, right? So private cloud can be a deployment where DartPoints deploys physical gear, deploys VMware technology onto that gear, and then either give the customer the ability to log into vSphere and vCenter and say, okay, great, I see my data center, my virtual data center, I see my clusters, I see my ESX hosts, great. I see my networking, fantastic. Now I can go build my applications. And that really gives the customer the flexibility to know they have complete control of that environment.
Yeah.
Okay. In some points, and this is a talking point that that Blake will talk about when we talk about one of our customers, it also means we can still give the customer the same experience that we give them from the public cloud. So something that's like vCloud Director that is a multi-tenant piece of software, we can also build that for a customer where they're like, hey, I want you to build me a hotel that then I go rent out rooms to. And we've done that before for customers, right? Where we build a public cloud that is dedicated to a customer that is then either reselling or using it internally for their own organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you kind of hit it. So like with private clouds, that tends to be the customers that are looking for that control, that flexibility to kind of determine their own destiny with the hardware. A lot of times terms like security and compliance come into play. So that's the second thing, is customers that have sensitive data or sensitive workflows, or they need that dedicated performance they can predict. That comes into the security / regulatory / compliance type side of things. And then to some degree, I guess the third use case that's pretty frequent are high performance applications or computing. So a lot of times private clouds come into play because they need specific hardware. Maybe it's a database, maybe it's again a high performance application, maybe something along those lines. And you even start to bridge a little bit into bare metal, but that tends to be the workloads that spark those private cloud type conversations, is around kind of cost control, security, high performance compute, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Normally with private clouds, we see customers that have a larger footprint. So they'll have more virtual machines, more storage, typically, right? And then they're not necessarily so worried about economy of scale that multi-tenancy brings. They're understanding, listen, I'm coming in with a bigger environment. I have specific needs. I need to be able to do X, Y, Z. Maybe I need to have graphics, GPU cards inside of my physical servers, right? Because I'm either running something like Citrix, where I'm really needing to pull the GPU cycles to run AutoCAD or run some type of graphics software, or whatever, data mining or something. Then private cloud really is custom fit to that customer. We're tailoring a suit for that customer's specific needs, and they're utilizing that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, with smaller businesses, oftentimes the economies of scale, the benefits of public cloud make the most sense by far, right? When it comes to private cloud, that tends to be your mid-size and up. Although there are exceptions, there are specific hardware demands of specific software for smaller companies. But yeah, that tends to be a mid-size and up, whereas the public cloud or multi-tenant cloud tends to make more sense, especially for those small businesses.
Blake,
Exactly.
do you ever see smaller customers who need a private cloud for one reason or another, but maybe don't have the IT staff to manage that?
Oh, yes. And you see that not just for private cloud, that's across all cloud types. So the expertise is in staffing is a unique challenge specifically for small to medium enterprises, small businesses specifically. They don't have the expertise to go out and build their own private cloud.
Yeah.
You need someone that understands hardware. You need someone that understands hardware refresh cycles. You need someone that understands hypervisor, and now building a cloud. And now how do I turn that into whatever XYZ need I have for the applications we're running? And it's a challenge. If it's a challenge, either because A, they can't afford the expertise, or B, again, we post-COVID, finding talent is still a challenge. Keeping a workforce is still a challenge, and that's across the board. We hear it all the time. And
Absolutely.
So that's where a provider like DartPoints kind of comes into play, because customers don't really need to worry about that anymore, because we kind of have their backs with the expertise. But the staffing challenge right now, there's no signs of it going away, but we see it all the time, specifically with building out private and public clouds.
Exactly. Yeah. And honestly, Michael, we've seen something when we had a customer, that utilized private cloud. They were actually a smaller customer. They literally were what I would normally say is too small for private cloud. But they're like, listen, William, we have the need. We have two things we need. One, we have a specific backup tool that has to talk to the hypervisor. And it's one of the ones that we didn't support natively in our public clouds. So they're like, look, this is business critical. We have to have this backup technology because we've already paid for it. We've got to stick with this. That was their first hurdle. The second hurdle was we have a phone system, a telephony system that talks to the hypervisor. In public cloud, since you're obscuring the underlying hardware necessarily from the customers, from the end user using, right? Private cloud, it was the choice that was really already laid out. Private cloud was the right solution because of their requirements, right? So typically we see private cloud with medium to larger customers, but we have had the times where smaller customers put into a position that they have to run on dedicated hardware for whatever technology reason, but they still don't want to necessarily go buy hardware. And that's where we can fit that need. Right.
Okay.
So we've talked about public cloud. We've talked about private cloud. What the heck is hybrid cloud, right? All right, another term, hybrid cloud. Well, obviously the name kind of lends it to kind of guessing what this means, right? Hybrid means a little bit of public, a little bit of private, right? And really you're trying, did we talk about the pros and cons of private cloud? Pros, greater control over your data, hardware. The cons are, it's more expensive for small environments. Yeah. So I just wanted to, and I'm going to post all these show notes in the podcast. So if you're listening or watching on video, you'll be able to see these talking points. Anyway, hybrid cloud. With hybrid cloud, you really want to take the best of both types of clouds and put them together, right? Yeah. Maybe you have the need for a private environment for some applications, but you need to utilize either public cloud at DartPoints or a hyperscaler, right? Maybe 60% of your application can run at a DartPoints data center in private cloud or in our public cloud, but you've got 40% needs to run at a cloud, whether if it's at a different geographic location, or maybe a public hyperscaler provides something that we don't, or another cloud provider doesn't. Maybe it's something like AI as a service, right? Or high performance database as a service. Hybrid cloud allows you to really bridge that gap between on-prem and a private cloud out to public cloud, right? At a hyperscaler.
Yeah.
So with that, and then this kind of starts when we start talking about this kind of multi-cloud, multi-environment, this really starts building into the discussion of what is edge computing, right? And edge computing could be, hey, I want to have, certain types of data close to my users, certain types of data that needs to be high performant. It needs to be low latency. It needs to be right in my data center. But there's other types of data or applications that really could be anywhere, right? I still need to have access to them, but they can be at another geographic location or another hyperscaler. So that's when we start talking about multi-cloud connector. And Blake, I want you to talk a little bit about that, because that's something that I haven't, being new to DartPoints, hasn't had a lot of, looking at it and configuring it. That's something that really is the glue that makes that work.
Yeah, so a lot of terms there. So yes, so multi-cloud, so in a hybrid cloud type environment, you're expecting some combination of on-prem, be it, dedicated. A lot of times we see like hardware for databases or something along those lines. There are, we're talking workloads. So there are workloads that will make sense in any type of environment. So in hybrid cloud, you may have workloads that make the most sense on-prem. You have workloads that make sense in a provider like DartPoints in a multi-tenant cloud. And then you're always going to have something from the hyperscaler public cloud space, like say, even just Office 365, something like that. So in that case, you've gone hybrid, right? Because you have some combo of on-prem and in the cloud. When we start talking multi-cloud, typically that implies that you have multiple cloud providers. So that's a combination of, again, maybe a private cloud that you've built on your own or you support on your own, maybe someone like DartPoints that provides cloud services, and then some hyperscaler that you maybe use for, say, Azure Virtual Desktop or S3 storage, something like that, right? And so when we're talking multi-cloud, we call it multi-cloud connector. That I think across the industry, they know that as a cloud on-ramp. And that's essentially just giving you connectivity to these hyperscalers. So again, typically Azure, typically Amazon Web Services, and typically Google Cloud. But it can go into SaaS applications as well, such as Salesforce, different things like that. But the way we kind of explain it is it's almost like private dedicated connectivity into these hyperscalers. So if you go into a hybrid or multi-cloud environment, connectivity, latency, performance becomes important, right? Because you're having some things run here, some things run there, and you want to guarantee that the performance is predictable, that the cost is predictable, right? You don't want a bandwidth bill that you have to explain. And so that's where the cloud on-ramps, I think with Azure, it's ExpressRoute. With AWS, I think they call it Direct Connect. That's where those connections come into play.
Yeah, and I think some of the key points to that is low latency, dedicated like privacy, right? So it's secure, and then it just gives organizations, and I think you had keyed in on this, the ability to have that dedicated cost where it doesn't fluctuate like, oh wow, my bandwidth bill just went through the roof this month. What happened? That happened with us several times where a customer would reach out and be like, what happened to my bandwidth bill? And we start going through NetFlow, and I'm like, look, I'm seeing all this traffic to this IP, and they're like, oh yeah, we started backing up into AWS that month. That's what that was, right?
Well, the one of the pros that I see, and I've seen this with customers and in my experience, a lot of times, the customer may say, hey, DartPoints is the right data center for 95% of my workloads, right? You guys, we're meeting the right security measures, we're meeting the right cost structure. It's just the right solution. But there's like maybe 2 to 5% that's like, I need to be in something like a FedRAMP cloud or something that is a specific requirement. Maybe I'm a lab or a federal agency, and I need to be in GovCloud, right? Yep. That is governed by a certain type of compliancy that maybe we don't have at one of our data centers, right? So, you don't want to run all your workloads in GovCloud, or maybe you want to be able to take cost advantage that DartPoints can provide to you, but this 2 to 5%, man, I have to run in another cloud. And this is where the multi-cloud connector, the DartPoints multi-cloud connector, is so beneficial, because now we can offer the customer that flexibility to say we can provide you a solution that includes your one-off compliancy needs or your one-off technology need, right? Maybe we don't do AI as a service in our data centers right now, and you need to go out and purchase some AWS or Azure compute that's for doing neural networks and that type of workload. Then the multi-cloud connector and also edge computing makes absolute perfect sense. All right.
Yeah, and another kind of what you said just sparked this. Another side of that is like DevOps. So say that
Yes.
you want to quick spin up and quick spin down resources for testing, right? But your production environment is at DartPoints. That's where, again, the multi-cloud comes into play, right? You can use Azure or AWS to spin up, spin down, test your applications, updates, that sort of thing. And then once it gets to a production state, then you pass it to your production resources in, say, like a DartPoints cloud. That's another instance, DevOps, I guess is the term, but that's another reason we see customers kind of trending toward the multi-cloud is, again, just that testing environment.
Absolutely. And again, DartPoints has the consultation of, the architecture and consultation and really the know-how to help customers make the right decisions, look for the best possible solution, whether if it's the best technology solution or the best economical solution, right, to meet the customer needs. And I mean, I know from personal experience, we've actually helped customers migrate to Azure and away from Azure. And honestly, I think most people trending so far coming to us and saying, hey, we kind of want to come back to one of our DartPoints data centers, right, for some reason. And Michael knows we just moved a very large customer from that was really, they started off in Azure, it was running fine. And then at some point they're like, look, we really got to get out of here. It's killing us cost. And they wanted to move out to our DartPoints data center, and we helped them migrate. It was a bumpy road, but we got it done, and the customer was best for the customer in the end. So we're hitting about 36 minutes in, and so really we'll come back to the question is what cloud is right for you. We really feel, I mean, cloud I think is generally where people are going these days. And you look at like cloud expansion, and Blake, you mentioned this in your article on the blog article. Cloud technology in general is still growing by leaps and bounds. It doesn't look like it's slowing down, right?
Absolutely not. Yeah, no. It's changing, it's growing, it's evolving. We're seeing new types of clouds, we're seeing new types of services. There are resurgences all the time. So there are concepts that we heard about 5 years ago, but kind of just trickled, and now all of a sudden we're hearing more about it. Things like bare metal, things like community clouds. These are not new concepts, but certainly there's some new air in the sails, I guess you could say, for some of these technologies.
So what is a community cloud?
Is that so? A community cloud.
Curious.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So community cloud, and there's again, you kind of see trends and hype cycles. A community cloud is almost a multi-tenant cloud dedicated to a particular vertical or use case. So say it's manufacturing. So say there's a group of manufacturers, they have to meet certain types of compliance. They have certain hardware requirements. They don't need a private cloud, right? They don't all want to have to build their own private cloud, but they have common necessities for their multi-tenant environment. So what you're seeing, and certainly something that DartPoints is considering for the future, is multi-tenant clouds dedicated for a purpose, for banking, for manufacturing, for XYZ, right? And the only difference is it's a cloud purpose built for the unique requirements and needs of that vertical. And that's where you get that there's a few more terms for it, but community cloud tends to be the most common. Community cloud is like again, your community of like-minded organizations. And now, again, instead of each of you building your own private cloud or deploying infrastructure, you've got a vendor that's, hey, this is for banking. This has specific compliance and regulatory ideas in mind as we built this for you. So you get kind of the economies of scale of public cloud, but you get also some of that tailored just for you concepts that you'd see in like a bare metal or private cloud type approach.
Gotcha. Perfect. Cool. And that actually explains it very well. And we see that, I think if, whether if it's in things like data mining or manufacturing, like you mentioned, or cryptocurrency, things like this. Absolutely. So I definitely want to refer our customers, and people listening to this blog blog article that you wrote, Blake. I think it's extremely good. In fact, I was looking at it earlier, and there's a you can download a cloud provider checklist. I think you do have to go in and fill in your email name and put in the normal forms that you have to do. But this is really a good document that helps guide customers kind of working through the checklist of when you're looking at a cloud provider or looking at what type of cloud works best for you. This is really a good checklist to run down.
Yeah, and Will, back to your earlier question about what cloud is right for me. The intent of us doing podcasts like this, writing blog articles like what Blake has written, it's to provide the customer some general guidance, right? But in the end, the best thing for them to do is, if they're curious or interested, come talk to us, right? So we can really get into the weeds, because there are certain nuanced details that only really get discovered through conversation and through technical discovery that may sway this one way or another.
Yep, absolutely. And we do as much listening. Actually, I think we do more listening than we do talking, right? We want to really listen to what the customer's needs are. We want to make sure that we're providing, top level consultation, but also top level services and products to our customers.
Yeah.
So guys, I think we're running around 41 minutes, which is kind of like our little sweet spot. And Michael, you talked about talking to us. Obviously, if you want to talk to our podcasters, we're changing things around a little bit. We're going to have some new websites. You'll be able to find the podcast on the DartPoints website. However, we're still on, the Apple Podcast, or on Spotify, anywhere that's a podcast aggregator that you typically use. If you search for DartPoints, you'll find us. And you can also engage with the podcasters if you send an email to podcast@dartpoints.com. You'll be able to engage with myself and Michael and our team here at DartPoints. Blake, you did a great job. Good discussion. This is our first podcast with you. Hopefully we'll have you again, but you got to turn on your darn camera.
I appreciate it. This was fun. I don't necessarily think I'm worthy of being on this podcast, but you guys do a great job.
Look at me and Michael. Come on, man.
I think I love these types of discussions, and I think again, just helping customers or end users navigate kind of this complicated world that is the acronym soup of all these different technologies. I think it's great, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll definitely have you back.
We're going to force you to be on other podcasts, so you have no say-so on this. But anyway, thank you. And also, the listeners, if you feel passionate about a technology topic or maybe something that we've said that you're like, man, I really want to be on a podcast as well, please also email us. We'd love to have special guests. So if you're a vendor or a customer or someone just, working in information technology and technology, we would love to have you on a podcast. Reach out to us. We'll talk and maybe have you on a podcast as well. All right, guys, this is going to wrap it up for today's podcast. Be on the lookout for upcoming podcasts. We have some already queued up, working on some show notes and some talking points for the next one. So we've got literally 3 or 4 podcasts ready to be rolled out. They're already kind of mostly produced. Be on the lookout. It's fantastic information. All right, guys, have a great weekend, and we'll catch you on the next podcast.
Thank you, guys.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.